Hello everyone, welcome to the Hemp Truth, Lies and Legends podcast. My name is Tom Pankras of hempdrying.com. I'm joined here with Michael Klepacz of Natural Materials Unlimited and Steve Allin from the International Hemp Building Association, joining us from his office, which is made of hempcrete actually. So very welcome Steve. You have incredible experience in hemp building. You gathered over, I think, decades already. So can you introduce yourself a little bit, what you've been doing?
As you say, I'm Steve Allin, and I've been using hemp building materials for 26 years, probably, since 1997 anyway. And I'm sitting here in my office in the wild mountains of Ireland, where we've been experiencing huge amounts of storms and rain and massive winds that are definitely a result of climate change. And trees down all over the place, the mountains absolutely gouged out with huge amounts of water running down the hills. And at the moment, I'm hoping that my recording doesn't get interrupted by the wind outside, but it's okay for the moment anyway. So I'm the director of the International Hemp Building Association, which we started 2009. And I work as a consulting on projects all over the world. Some of them have been sort of high-tech projects of individuals building homes or people trying to get into technologies and wanting to know which are the best ones to get into. And a lot of projects in the developing world where people are looking for like real solutions to address the sort of problems they're experiencing and trying to find a way of doing that with not much money or with an understanding of maybe vernacular and local building techniques, but wanting to know how that can be included and also how they might be able to do things in a modern way, but that is appropriate for their location.
So that's nice. Could you tell us just briefly a bit more about, just in a simple way, about, let's just call them biocretes, right? So different plant-based materials combined with hydrated lime. Why does it work? How does it work? Where do you think it's appropriate? Where do you think it's not appropriate to use it?
Right. Okay. So there are two main materials that we're making to use in construction. Hemp fiber insulation, which is basically a sort of simple replacement for glass fiber or rock wool or sheep's wool or whatever. It has similar benefits to materials like sheep's wool, in as much as it's non-toxic and comes from a natural source, but it's far superior to materials like glass wool and rock wool because it works with moisture, which is present in all atmospheres, all places in the world, and the use of what we call hempcrete, which isn't necessarily the best word to use, but it's the only one that really applies to it because it is a sort of not a liquid material, but a moist material that we place in place, and it sets relatively hard. It's not load bearing. It's used as an envelope around buildings, but it's the way that it handles heat and moisture, and the heat in moisture, that is its main benefit and advantage. And it's the thing that makes it different to other materials, because the other materials either don't use moisture very well and are sort of negatively affected by moisture, or they don't have any moisture in them at all, and they create an airtight, unhealthy barrier where you're either suffocating if you don't have mechanical means of ventilation, or molds and moisture cause a problem because they can't move through and out of the structure. So you mentioned lime as a binder, and that has been the basis of many of the binders, but we're looking for alternatives to that because lime isn't necessarily the most environmentally friendly of those binders. It works in many advantage ways with physics and chemistry, but from a creation point of view, the emissions might be construed as being too high.
Okay, interesting. And how did you personally get involved in the building with industrial hemp?
Right, well, as you can see by the look of me, I was a bit of a sort of alternative hippie type, and so I was always a fan of cannabis. And through that, I discovered, through sort of alternative bookshops and stuff in the 80s, I was living and working in London, that The Emperor Wears No Clothes was a very interesting book, and it answered so many questions. It created so many links and connections between the sort of issues that we're interested in, that possibly the use of cannabis had helped focus our minds on, of the environmental implications of our lifestyles on the planet, and how the limits to growth, a report that was written in the early 70s, had already outlined that the way humanity was living on the planet was not in any way sustainable, and that we had to change. And so, you know, possibly being stoned helped me tune into the fact that we needed to find a different way of living. And this book provided a whole load of arguments as to why that situation had come about and what we might do about it, and that cannabis might actually be part of the solution to many of the problems, which was quite remarkable at the time. And so that book was published in a few editions quite quickly as it became very popular. And one of the, maybe the second or third edition, I think it was the third edition, included in the back of it an advert for this hemp building material, which hadn't been mentioned in the text before that. But this hemp building material was a material that was developed in France by a lady called France Perrier. She had taken it up from a development that had happened in that sort of northern region of France by an incredibly ingenious older man called Charles Rossetti, who'd invented the use, or conceived of the use, of the hemp particles, which were a product of a factory just up the road from where he lived, and mixing it with, in his case, a mixture of cement and lime, which he knew that if you added lime to cement, it helped work in old buildings, because he was an expert in the repairing and maintenance of old buildings. And he used it in a house that I went to visit just a few months ago, the Maison de Turc in Nogent-sur-Seine, in the Barça-Aube region, just east of Paris. And that was a great success. And that then created interest around France of like a possibility of not only repairing old buildings, but creating new buildings. And she launched this company and published with her, an architect friend of hers, a very good technical manual, which I obtained. And it was really like eye-opening as to all the different ways I could use it. And it just so happened that at that time I was in the middle of starting to build my house. So I was already too far along the road of designing the house, building the main structure, but I realized that I could use it as a hemp plaster on the inside of the building. So I did that, and that was a success and looked great. And many people came to see my house, loved the hemp plaster aspect of it, because even though it was a new house, it made it look like it was sort of old, and because I was looking for that sort of vernacular cottage look. And I got asked to apply it to many other buildings, and started a company doing exactly that, and importing the materials and using it. And then, of course, I spent loads of time on the telephone explaining it to people. So I started doing training courses. And then I realized that, well, I had to create my own technical manual. And that then became a book, because I was spending so much time on the telephone talking to people, telling about it. It's like, well, this is ridiculous. I haven't got time to be spending hours explaining it to every single person how it works. So I wrote the first book, and that was the first book with glossy photographs in it and color photographs and stuff. And so I joined the French Building Association, and that made me aware of the fact that I needed to write that book, because there I was in France, where they'd conceived the material, and there was the beginning of an industry, and they had no book, they had no real way of promoting it, and they were terrible at promoting it, and they were not interested in promoting it outside of France, especially as it was the English language, and they didn't have any interest in using the English language. So I presented this book to them, and they were very impressed, because it made them able to address the Ministry of Sustainability and the environmental ministries in France, and have something that looked good. They were a bit disappointed, of course, that it was in the English language, but they were able to use that as a tool to give them credibility. Anyway, that book created a whole international awareness, if you like. Without boasting too much, it was quite successful, and it had a large impact. And eventually, after a few years, there was such a connection network of people that were like interested and wanting to communicate with me and link up and discuss details and stuff they were encountering, that I decided it was time to have an international conference. which when I look back on it was pretty crazy, especially as I decided to hold that conference in my hometown here in Kenmare, right down in the southwest of Ireland, you know, in the middle of, like, not so much from some people's point of view in the middle of nowhere, but in my point of view in the middle of somewhere really amazing. So I invited people from all over the world, and I had over 70 people literally from all over the world. And at the end of that event, I thought, well, should we just start an international association? So I asked for a show of hands for interest in that, and sure enough, most people seem to be interested, and so we started the association. It's you know, it's a very long slog. It's not easy in any way whatsoever, and associations are a whole job in themselves to run. So without the team of my wife and my daughter and some other close friends and associates, I wouldn't have been able to get that together. But I do that, and that helps. Now we have, and what have become annual events. They weren't annual to start with because I didn't have the energy and didn't have the belief that I could have enough interesting subjects and topics and presentations to do one every year. But now we have them every year, and we're now going to hold our 13th symposium in the US, which is going to be challenging.
Where will that be, and when?
In the Lower Sioux Indian Community Reservation in Merton in Minnesota.
Okay. And how can people find out more about this event?
They can go to the International Hemp Building Association website, which is internationalhempbuilding.org. And there they can find all the information about it they like, the one that we have put up so far. Basically, you can buy a ticket to it already. You can sponsor the event already. All those things are available and accessible. The beginnings of the program are starting. We have quite a few speakers lined up, and we have a sort of basic plan of the event. In as much as it's going to be over 3 days, we're going to have 3 mornings of presentations. Very serious presentations from science and research worlds, from agricultural worlds, from the design worlds, product development worlds, and from companies and individuals who've created projects and successfully completed them or imagined them. So we're going to have that, and then in the afternoons we're going to be having demonstrations of application techniques, of spraying or casting or block making, whatever, and we're going to have tours of the factory that they've established in the Lower Sioux Reservation and many of the projects that they've completed there of housing projects. So that should be quite exciting. We'll having on the Saturday night, we're going to be having a big gala dinner where there's going to be auctions for various things that people have donated, all in aid of the Lower Sioux School, which is a school to teach the heritage and culture and traditions of the Lower Sioux people. And that's hopefully going to be hosted by a local celebrity. And then we're also going to have, for those interested in partying, at the end of the event, we're going to have an end of event party and hopefully let our hair down.
Nice. Well, it's safe to say then that we're actually talking to a hemp living legend, for sure.
Well.
Like you're the OG of hempcrete, you know. If it wasn't for you, I don't know if this thing would have ever left France. I know how much French people love to hold on to their knowledge and how much they dislike to communicate in English from personal, you know, from 10 plus years in hemp myself.
It is a strange phenomenon. I've just been to the World Hemp Forum, which is where I met Tom, of course, and yeah, it was a strange event because, to be honest, it was you know, very much about them sort of patting themselves on the back of like, oh yeah, we're the best, you know, we're the forefront of it all, and in some ways they are. They certainly have the most processing plants in France. They have a very established hemp farming tradition and industry, but they had a tour where they took people around some of the building projects in the local town there, and they were all the same. They were all just one type of application, and as you'll probably hear in the next half an hour, there are so many ways of using it, so many different approaches, and so many different styles and understandings of building around the world that we can't be limiting it to just one or two particular ways of doing things. Excuse me. We have to show how adaptable it is, and that, I think, has been my role. That even though we know that it needs to fit into existing industrial construction in a sort of regulated way, there's no point in trying to exclude methods that do work.
Mm-hmm.
The whole sector of what might be called natural building or traditional building or alternative technology or whatever is vital in creating the solutions that we need to address the very serious problems we have around the world of energy use or material resource depletion. Those things are very important, and we can't just be like say, oh no, we've got to have this because that's how we measure that material. So
right.
We'll get into that maybe in a little while.
Okay. Well, I guess just off the top of your head, sorry, Tom, to interrupt. Off the top of your head, what are some of these major, besides building non-load bearing walls that are very well insulated and beautiful looking, what are some of these other ways to use hempcrete that's on your mind?
Well, when we're talking about hempcrete or hemp fiber insulation to main extent, we're talking about creating an envelope. It's not about structural things, and that's where the term hempcrete gets misunderstood. People often ask me, oh, can you build, I want to use it to build a road. It's like, well, that's not what we're talking about here anymore.
The crete really knocks people off, huh?
Yeah, but the thing is that all buildings need a structure, and that structure can be a variety of things. It can be a variety of things because those are the things that the architect or designer is familiar with, or they're the things that are used traditionally in that area. So it might be a concrete frame, it might be a steel frame, it might be a timber frame, it might be a bamboo frame, or it might be devising ways of using hempcrete in different densities to create structure. So it can be structural. And so we have situations where we're using hempcrete sprayed around a structure that has an existing sort of surface inside that is maybe going to be kept there, and that we're just piling up this stuff around the outside of it, or we're casting it in place where maybe the surface of that material, when we remove the shuttering, casting shuttering, is the surface, and it looks really great. But there's plenty of uses where of hempcrete or even hemp fiber insulation where you would never know that's what's being used, other than the feeling of the building, that it feels different somehow. Especially if it's a cast or sprayed building, there's that complete continuous monolithic envelope around you that doesn't have gaps and cracks in it, and so it's literally a real sort of solid nest around you, as if you're in, I don't know, some kind of a mud hut, if you like, or something where there's no gaps. It's just this warm blanket all around you, and that's really what we're providing. We're providing an incredibly economic energy saving blanket around whatever structure you've got, right? So that's really what we can do with these materials, and it can be anything from building with hempcrete blocks, or it can be just plastering hempcrete in the inside, or hemp plaster up the inside of a existing old stone cottage, where you're turning that old stone cottage into something that has a surface that is really cold and absorbs a lot of heat and dissipates it, or you to changing it to have a material that creates a warm to the touch material on the inside of it that holds heat. And that's the issue about building, is that at the moment in the western part of the world, or the main part of the world, we're starting to measure buildings for their environmental performance, if you like, or their energy performance, especially their energy performance. And it's a completely inaccurate, ridiculous way of building, of measuring, sorry. It just doesn't accurately reflect reality. And so the very way that we're trying to analyze and say, oh, this building is very good for the climate, isn't necessarily true at all. And in fact, in many ways, it's not at all good for the climate, because it's made out of materials that are not at all sustainable or good for the planet to produce. And they're creating environments inside that building that aren't healthy, without a continuous supply of energy. And they're only, and they have become skewed by industries that are producing these, sometimes toxic, but carbon intensive type materials that are made with either from fossil fuels or with a large input of fossil fuels. So that's the problem. And we, in the natural building world, to get back to the initial point of your question, of natural building materials, of natural composites, if you like, of materials, that we offer a completely different solution where we're working with nature. We're not trying to just keep it out. I mean, obviously you don't want the rain to be coming into your building, and you don't want the wind to be coming into your building, you don't want the cold to be coming into your building, but you want to create a situation where you're working with nature and that you create a balance between the interior conditions and the exterior conditions. And that has to work with moisture, because moisture is everywhere. And all the current materials that are recommended and measured as being really like high insulation value are measured in a way that is completely inaccurate and irrelevant to reality. Because unless you're living in the Atacama Desert and building a house there, there is moisture everywhere, everywhere all over the world, whether in the tropics or the temperate zones or whatever, there is moisture. Water vapor is in the air. And there's no point trying to pretend you can keep that out. You know, they try to in building world with all these layers of plastic and tape and making something so you're living in a place that without an air pump, you're going to suffocate because it's airtight. And I remember when they first started to promote airtight structures, somebody in the audience put up their hand and said, well, what are the implications of living in a completely airtight structure? And the guy thought for a minute and said, well, you suffocate.
Wow. Yeah, we don't want that. We want to live in a living, breathing.
I mean, I could talk for hours about all my experiences of living in natural buildings or being in natural buildings compared to like synthetic modern structures and stuff, you know, from examples of, like I was just talking to one of my elderly neighbours the other day about the fact that when I first came to Ireland 50 years ago, almost exactly, I used to be sitting in old cottages with people that lived there, and in the middle of winter they had the door open. It's like, if you did that nowadays, people go, shut the door, shut the door, shut the door, because the buildings held heat. Now, okay, they were probably heating the building in a way that might be considered, you know, like energy intensive or fossil fuel intensive because there were carbon emissions because they were burning turf or firewood on the first stove. But they had developed their own ways of doing that very efficiently. And they didn't have all the other carbon intensive technologies of heat exchangers or air conditioning or all that, those kind of technologies, which you think how much carbon is involved in creating one of those, and all the electricity grids and all the rest of it that go with creating that, then that's also a huge amount of carbon. So these guys were doing very, very simple things, just getting the materials from just their local. They developed ways of using it very economically because they didn't want to be spending half their life harvesting that material. And they were living in places that naturally stayed dry, that held the heat. And so the building was comfortable. Plus, they also didn't expect to be lounging around their house in the middle of winter in a t-shirt and their underpants, which is, again, completely ridiculous. It's winter, put a jumper on. It's madness. I mean, it's just, you know, I've been at many big scale building conferences and everybody's really impressed by the heat exchangers and this and that and all the different technologies that you can get. And I've often ended, well, I used to many years ago, I don't bother going to those things very often these days, but when I used to end my talks with, of course, there is a very cheap solution, you know, an alternative technology to this. And it might cost you anything between £100 or euros and maybe €5. And it's called knitting, and it's called a woolly jumper. It's called, you know, it's like very simple. You don't need all this technology to feel comfortable. Just dress appropriately. As Billy Connolly used to say, there's no such thing as bad weather, just inappropriate clothing.
Yeah, for sure. When I often have Zoom calls in the evening when I'm at my warehouse. And especially during the winter, I wear this wool. You can't call it a scarf because it's actually a tube.
No, yeah.
And you pull over your head, and I also have my wool hat. And people, they just look at me like, "How are you sitting in your cold warehouse right now?" And it's like, well, you know, it would cost me $10,000 a year to heat an entire warehouse to be at t-shirt temperature. Instead, I just, you know, like I'll wear some thermals under my clothes. And just, you know, you keep your head warm, you keep your neck warm, and you're fine. You're perfectly fine.
Well, it's part of, if you like, the interconnectedness of the whole issue we're talking about. We're talking about hemp, and as I was saying about The Emperor Wears No Clothes as a book, as the ideas in that book were all about the interconnectedness of everything, of how the implications of creating laws that were to the benefit of a bunch of industrialists or bankers, the whole implications of using technologies that were based on a quick fix solution of picking the low hanging fruit of fossil fuels, rather than thinking about, okay, what are the long-term implications of this? And of course, you can read many tracts of the sort of descriptions of old spiritual, religious, moral texts from the past, and they were nearly all about the fact that we were only looking after this planet for our future generations, and that has just gone out the window, unfortunately, and it's all about short-term gain and the rest of it. And so we've developed all these methods of our lifestyle which are completely unsustainable. We cannot go on living like this. Of course, the business as usual model is just totally addictive to so many people, and they just cannot imagine how they have to change their lifestyle. And that, unfortunately, for these people that just cannot do that, is what we have to do, or we're going to end up in a complete mess. And we'll end up in a complete mess, not just individually, but as communities and as nations. And as we can see now, with probably the greatest element of example of denial of reality possible, with what's happening in the US with politics at the moment, which is similar to what's been happening with Russia and China. I've met many young Chinese people who said to me, "Oh, what do you think of China?" And my simple answer is, "You're too late." That we develop these technologies and ways of life because, as the sort of at that time, the center of sort of technology and innovation and everything was in Europe, and then we discovered America. Well, we discovered it. It was already discovered before that, but we came late in the party and discovered this enormous tract of resources that we couldn't imagine we'd ever finish using. And it was like, right, so we can just borrow, just invent credit for the future, and we can just go over there, and there's going to be endless amounts of trees and gold and whatever other minerals we want, and just will go on forever. And that's not true. We've soon discovered that, and we've been able to procreate and create this huge humanity population. And now we're at very definitely past the limits. And China has pretended that it can just join the party and do exactly as we've done. Yeah. But you're way too late, because if you think that your population is going to be able to get and just extract the kind of lifestyle that we did recklessly, it's not possible. Not without destroying the planet completely, which is sort of what started to happen. It's not the Chinese fault. It's just they've looked at us and said, well, why can't we have what you got? And India is now doing the same thing. Why can't we have what you got? Well, because we shouldn't have had it. That's the only answer I've got, is that, sorry, but we gave you the completely wrong example of how you should live on this planet. And you can't copy us. Because if you do, it's going to be complete disaster. And part of that disaster is going to be the fight to try and grab those resources as they dwindle. And that's exactly what's happening now.
Today on LinkedIn, I saw, so now, right now when we're recording this, let's call it the middle of February 2025. And Trump has just announced they're going to bring back plastic straws. And without getting into a debate about whether it's good or not, my first comment to this person, because the person basically posted like, hey, okay, fine, let's bring back plastic straws, but let's do it in a way that those plastic straws can finally become circular, right? And so then my comment was, all right, when a plastic straw is being used, like let's just say in McDonald's, you're also using a plastic lid. The fact is the plastic straw and the plastic lid aren't even the same kind of plastic. And like that right there just creates an issue, because it's not like anybody pulls their straw out of the lid before trashing the cup. So now we have to create some sort of magical system that can separate the lids from the straws. It's the same here with milk containers in the European Union. They made it to where, all containers now with the screw top, the lid is now stuck to the bottle. But the label is made from one plastic, the bottle is made from another plastic, and the top is made from a different plastic. And it's like, God forbid we spend an extra nickel to make sure that all three, the label, the bottle, and the top, are made from the same plastic, and they can just be recycled together. How crazy is that?
or that we go back to using glass that we took back for a deposit, which worked perfectly well for probably 100 years.
Sure.
Why have a lid and a straw in the first place? Can you not just drink out of a cup? What's wrong with you, for God's sake? Why do you have to suck on a tube? It's just like infantile. It's just like really ridiculous, as if we the only way we can drink is if we're sucking on a breast. It's just mad. Get real, you know. But that's it's like going back to the argument about jumpers. My words fail me when it comes to talking about the guy that's in charge of America at the moment. It's just beyond belief and really disappointing and making many Europeans incredibly angry. Yeah. And I was talking to the two guys that are helping me organise the symposium just yesterday, or the day before yesterday, and I was saying that there are so many things that I love about America. More than anything, it was the birthplace, if you like, of the culture that I consider I'm part of rock and roll, and that it could easily end up with a situation that America is just surrounded by enemies. You got Canada to the north, China to the west, Europe to the east, and Mexico to the south. It's like. And Danny from the Lower Sioux laughed and said, "Well, we've lived like that all the time."
Right.
Surrounded by enemies. But that is just terrible. It's tragic. But it's what happens when politics becomes an entertainment show, when people are so bombarded with misinformation that they think they're really informed. But of course they're not. They're really misinformed. And when the whole system and structure of politics and administration and everything becomes corrupted, it's where you're having to choose between the red puppet and the blue puppet. The puppets of the people that in the money world especially, who cannot let go of their system, which is basically based on destruction of the natural world, because that's the only way you can have their kind of growth. And their kind of growth is not. There are three types of growth. There's mechanical growth, where you add A to B and you have a straight line of growth. There's the growth of like nature, of people, of life forms, where you grow up. There are sort of growth spurts, and then you get to a sort of certain age where you sort of stay the same height maybe, and then you start to get shorter as your joints shrink and stuff, and you die. And then there's the kind of growth, exponential growth, where like cancer cells, they get more, and that's it. The graph goes up in a curve where you're climbing vertically. And we've been nearly trying to climb vertically with all the things we've been trying to do, water extraction, forestry extraction, soil use, whatever, for a long time now. And the only end to that is a point where you either use up everything in 2 seconds, or you collapse. And people aren't taught that kind of stuff at school, unfortunately. So you now have huge amounts of people who think, I know what I'm talking about, and we can have more, because the guy on the television told me I can have more. Whether it was the advertiser or the politician who wants to get elected next year, you can have more. I promise you can have more, when there isn't any more.
Well, let's try to link these two things together then. So we've talked about let's just say for the last few minutes we've been talking about politics and sustainability, and then we also have hempcrete and sustainability. So my big question is, and of course the short answer is laws and regulations maybe, but I often, I'll back up. I've been obsessed with sustainability since 2009. I became obsessed with sustainability because I was taught project management in the military, and they made me very much focus on fraud, waste, and abuse and efficiency. And so then when I got out of the military, I looked at our world and I asked, where are we being inefficient? Where are we wasting the most? And to back up your point from a few minutes ago, if everybody lived like Americans, we would need 4 planets worth of resources. So obviously, everybody, this is what I was talking about at the Project Management Institute in November. For me, sustainable means all of the human beings on the planet are using 0.999 planets worth of resources per year. That is sustainable. Anything else is unsustainable. And for me, it's a very black and white definition, And so, of course, we can't have vertical growth all the time. And so that being said, why aren't governments? So, okay, in France, you have it to where now new buildings have to have a green roof. And there are some new regulations finally coming in to, let's just say, force companies or force people to be more eco-friendly, but why aren't countries, why aren't governments sprinting towards hempcrete and other materials like this? Why aren't they sprinting towards it? Is a massive solution. It's still money. It's still industry. Yes, it's disruptive, but why aren't they sprinting towards it?
Probably 2 or 3 reasons. One is just ignorance and the fact that the education system is very slow. It's full of, and I'm going to probably get in trouble for saying this, but it's full of a lot of very lazy people who don't want to change the. Sorry, there's an actually raging rainstorm just occurring outside the window, so the audio might be a bit disturbed. But there's a resistance in academia and in the construction world and in the political world for change. They talk about it, but when the actual implications of it means that academics have to really look at what they're teaching and change their modules and actually believe in their job as a vocation rather than just turning up at 9 to 5 and it's like, you've got this job and you've got these students. Hey, you've got these young people in your care. You're supposed to be guiding them into a future. You should be thinking about guiding them into a future that is not only economically viable, but that is good for their mental health, that's good for their day-to-day happiness, that's good for their children, good for their children's children. You should believe in what you're doing. And it's the same when it comes to architects or people in the professions, that why would you just want to design another building because the client's just, boring and just want something boring? So why don't you try and divert them or guide them in a way that is actually beneficial, that's good, that's positive? Well, it means you've got to work harder, you've got to take risks, you've got to do all that sort of stuff. And when you talk about taking risks, there are risks, but at the same time, if you find the right people to guide you and the right consultants, then you'll get the right advice and you won't make mistakes. So, I offer training courses and stuff, and I'm always really thrilled when I get architects or academics on those courses, because I know that I might be able to inspire them, which I'm lucky enough to have the experience of people telling me that I inspire them when I do these teaching courses, that I might inspire them to make changes, because I can't do it all. I can't go to every university around the world or every school or every building company. So we need to change that. And then the politicians, it's even a bigger problem, because they're only looking to get re-elected in 4 years' time or 3 years' time or 2 years' time. So they're not really interested in making the sort of changes or explaining to people why they need to make the changes that might not be popular. And that's the whole argument against populism, is that people say, oh yeah, no, but it's their people. All the problems you've got is that person's fault over there. And if it wasn't for that person over there, you could have everything you want. And that's completely ridiculous. So we have to change so many things, and that needs that the whole sort of future imagining of what we're going to do tomorrow and the next day and the next year and the next decade has to be really considered properly. We have to take it seriously. And that means, of course, that people have to actually understand and comprehend the realities. And you've now got this system of communicating information that is being abused no end, and it's being, people's minds are being minds are being filled full of absolute rubbish. And so we're having to fight against that. Now, of course, there is also the other thing that might be considered conspiracy that some people have always liked to talk about, and to a certain extent, it wasn't a problem in the past, but it might be becoming a problem in the future, and that is that existing industries that are these days corporations, massive corporations, now they see us as starting to be a little bit of a potential threat, that they try and resist us, and that we'll have people that claim to be academics and professors and whatever and lecturers in universities who are basically just representatives of companies. So they're representatives of massive insulation companies or construction material companies or whatever. And so they're there trying to pretend that you can put a green label on their products. Oh, glass fiber is sustainable. It's like, in what way is glass fiber sustainable?
Sure.
And they'll come up with all sorts of rubbish, but they're not used to even being asked that. They're just being used to just being accepted because, I'm a professor and you believe what I say. like, well, I was on a conference just about 6 months or so ago, where there was a whole lot of people on the chat, and there was like 4 or 5 experts, and the people on the chat weren't allowed to ask questions to the experts. So they were just there spouting out this rubbish. And there was all this chat going on in the commentary between students and other people that were aware of environmental issues, going, but what he's saying is rubbish, but we weren't allowed to challenge them. And goodness knows whether those comments will even be included in any future recording or saving of that as a resource. So, you know, that is now as it might be a good sign, as much as we are now at a situation where we're being treated seriously and they actually think of us as a threat. Because before that, they just saw us as this niche bunch of lunatics doing this sort of silly little thing around the corner. But, you know, there are programs like Grand Designs, which have, run by Kevin MacLeod, who himself personally realized the no-brainer benefits of hempcrete. But, and you were talking about drinking straws earlier. There was a couple of women who run a film production company in America, and they did a film called Bringing It Home, which was all about revitalizing the hemp industry in America. And they came to my symposium in the second one we had, and I helped introduce them to lots of people, and they did lots of filming. And one of those people then introduced them to Kevin MacLeod, who runs Grand Designs program, and he was in the process of building his own development with his own money, purely using hempcrete buildings. And they recorded him, and he said, look, you know, we're building these houses, we're absorbing carbon from the motorway and the railway and the rest of it, either side of the hemp field that we've grown as part of the project to build these houses. We're putting them in buildings where we're locking that carbon up and where we're not using much energy in the last phase of it. It's a no-brainer. It's just insane. Why aren't we doing this? But of course, you know, he's also running a TV program that's called Grand Designs. And so it's all about highlighting these ridiculous, huge, expensive, fancy looking, luxurious building projects. And so he can't just feature hemp buildings all the time because, well, that'll be boring, you know. But he does every now and again feature one, and they're nearly always really successful. There was no problems, whereas the other ones, people have these crazy, ridiculous ideas and massive projects, and so many times they're a complete disaster, or not so much a complete disaster eventually, but they cause huge amounts of stress that the couples involved sometimes, you know, divorce. So the relationship goes down the pan, and eventually there's some glossy thing that he can walk around and you know, have like a glossy sort of property porn type magazine thing. But you know, he has tried to promote it in that way, but you'd have to have an ecological building program on the television, and there's not much of that going on because, again, it's not backed by the right people. The people in television and stuff don't see that that's what we should be doing, that we should be conceiving information presented in a really good way that is really positive. And I don't know why that is. I don't know whether it's because the people that are running television are warped and part of a conspiracy, or whether it's just because they just don't have the imagination to understand, or whether it's people that are proposing productions from production companies aren't proposing the right ideas. They're not coming up with the right concept, the right packages to be presented to them. I don't know, but that's something that certainly could and should be done, and it would certainly help promote an alternative version of information.
Yeah, I'm very interested. Yeah, like you said, the global people are not really aware yet of the possibilities of building with natural materials. You said education of the public is very important. What do you see as major actions that are needed to expand the use of hemp and other natural materials in building?
Right. Well, I think that it's happening in one way without us needing to push it so much, in as much as, for instance, the company called Kingspan, that were one of the couple of companies that made these sort of isonite foams that they've been using as insulation and special external cladding, have been involved in something that was a complete disaster in this fire in London, the Grenfell Tower. And so they knew that they had to change. And so what they've done is they've invested heavily in natural building material manufacturing. And so they are, and this will be needed to do, these big companies need to change, because they have created a situation where they control so much of the supply that they've created such a huge, like, interconnected continental supply chains, where, you know, you buy something in a shop in Ireland and it's the same you're buying every shop in Ireland, and probably the same as you're buying every shop in London, in England, and possibly in most of Europe as well. So this sort of uniformity of products is ridiculous in some ways, but it's how we are at the moment. So these people have the power to change things at source, if you like. But that the other implication of that is that the materials that they're producing and the way they're measured is being challenged by the likes of me, and not just me, but I've brought with me as the person who saw it clearly as the issue that needed to be challenged when the European Industrial Hemp Association contacted me about like, let's get involved in creating the regulations for hempcrete, or hemp building materials, basically, because they'd just been involved in doing a lot of lobbying and stuff in creating the regulations for hemp foods, right? So they thought it was going to be not simple, because regulations for hemp food weren't easy either, but they thought that it would be a process that they understood. But unfortunately, contact with me made them aware of the fact that, well, actually, we need to change the whole way that materials are measured, because the current way of just measuring something for thermal conductivity isn't enough. And it certainly isn't enough when we're talking about all bio-based natural materials. They all behave in a similar way. They work with nature rather than just against it. So we need to change to make a level playing field before we can say, oh, you can use our products, they're just as good, if not better, than all the ones that are around it, because they've developed a system, whether intentionally or by laziness, that means that our materials don't perform as well on the particular method that they've used for describing performance. So that's what we need to change. Now, that was, you know, first of all, I think Francisco Marizzi, who's in charge of this sort of like project in the European Union, in the European Industrial Hemp Association, you know, sort of like was thinking, well, okay, well, so how do we do that? So I'm not a scientist, I'm not a professor, I'm not an academic, so I have contacts with all those people. I knew the people that had written the research and the thesis and stuff that was proving the point that we needed to make. And so it was a question of gathering them together, gathering their academic expertise to challenge the people in bureaucracy. Now, we were on a phone call with the people with from bureaucracy, and there's like an older sort of a guy that was maybe an architect or scientist who became a bureaucrat, and then there's a young scientist researcher guy, or younger researcher guy, who is responsible for sort of designing the sort of testing and overseeing the testing that's done. So I explained to them what I'd explained to you before, that testing a material in a completely dry environment is completely ridiculous, and so undermines all the veracity of the kind of standards that you're creating. And so you're creating standards that do not address climate change or carbon emissions at all. It's just a completely fake label that you're putting on things, that, oh, look, mine's the green arrow, not the red arrow. It's, you know, not the orange arrow in between. It's just, that's irrelevant. It's how does the material work in reality, which is a lot more complex. There are lots of different climatic conditions, different humidity, different temperatures, wind speeds, all that sort of stuff. And if we're going to be accurate, we need to incorporate that. In a similar way, to include hemp in the conversation about carbon credits, that people think, oh, you can just like calculate, that's how much carbon is sequestered by hemp, and we just give a carbon credit on that. And it's like, well, there's the type of variety you're growing, there's the weather conditions, there's the soil, and how that soil absorbs carbon, and that soil can change from farm to farm, never mind from region to region or nation to nation. And so your carbon calculations for any carbon credits you might want to create are going to be really complicated, and they need a whole load more evaluation and regulation before you can ever start to do that. So if we get back to the building and like, okay, how can we evaluate how this material is performing? We do need more complex versions of testing. And unfortunately for the manufacturers of these synthetic products, their materials start to not look so good when you start to look at them like that. So of course, they don't like that, because, well, yeah, but these tests show that our material is the best. And it's like, yeah, but it's not the best. And we can show that scientifically now. And what it means is that universities and academia has had to invest in in testing things like climate chambers. So they have to create a big space in a warehouse or whatever, or a big building where they can create an earthquake, a tornado, a heat wave, a drought, or whatever, and temperature fluctuations and stuff on a structure. But we can also back that up with loads of buildings that we've now built, as I show in my latest book, Hemp Building's 50 International Case Studies, and that's only 50 of the thousands that have been done around the world. There are loads of different buildings that we could either incorporate testing and sensors in, or we can test the environmental behavior of living in that building and what the temperature is like inside and outside and lots of stuff very easily, and show that, okay, in that climate, and we would then need cooperation between universities, so they're not the sole beneficiaries of a particular grant or whatever. We need pan-continental, pan-global research studies that can correlate all that information so that we get global standards. And there's no reason we shouldn't be able to do that. We have all this interconnected with the internet and computers and stuff. There's no reason why that shouldn't be done, except for the sort of personal interests of either professors or universities who want to try and own or claim ownership of information. And you know, for the benefit of humanity, we need to push that out of the way and say, no, we need all of you to work together and all contribute things in. You'll all be listed at the end of it to get your credits and stuff, but that we all need you to work together, because we're all living on the same planet that has all these different things, but we're all facing the same issues. So we need to say, okay, over here, we've got this result. Over here, we got this result. And if we put that together, oh, there's similar kinds of climates there, and so we can say that that's sort of semi-arid, or that's semi-tropical, or subtropical, or temperature, or whatever climate. We can say that it works like that. If it's a very windy situation, or if it's a shady situation, or whatever, so it's not that hard. It's not rocket science. Or maybe it is as complicated as rocket science, but we've made rockets and we can do that. So it's not as if rocket science is unattainable. So, you know, that's what we need to really get it, so that an architect can say, oh no, we're going to use hemp on that. Oh, you can't use hemp because no, we can, because we've got all the scientific backup, and we already have the scientific backup for many different regions already. For Ireland, for Britain, for France, for Canada, for Germany, Australia. There are all sorts of tests been done.
Yeah.
And there are examples all over the world. There's examples in South Africa, examples in Nepal. You know, I've been helping a couple there who are incredibly dynamic, who have a hemp building company there, who are building houses in the southern sort of semi-arid plains of India, which is the very south of Nepal. And they're insulating hostels right up in the Himalayas, where they're having to trek the materials up with mule trains. So we've, you know.
Yeah, so it's about creating a knowledge basis and a scientific basis to see.
And not just about hemp, but about like all natural materials. I mean, you know, I'm not saying that you have to use all hemp materials in a building. There are loads of other materials like wood fiber insulation products, or earth, or other types of roofing materials that can be used. But you know, people tend to, and I've just had an inquiry just now about somebody who wants to build a hemp building, but they want to put an earth, you know, a green roof on it. And you were talking about that maybe in France they're starting to stipulate that kind of thing. But the structural implications of having a green roof are quite great. You know, it's a lot of weight to be putting on a roof. And the only place in the world they ever used to have green roofs was in Norway. That's the only example I've ever been able to find of a vernacular building style where they tucked little huts into the hillsides and they made the roof go over the top, and it was partly insulation and it was partly wind protection and everything. But it's a climate where, well, half the year it's snow. You know, and it's a very steep sloping roof. It wasn't as if they were flat roofs, but nowadays people want to build these flat roofs with a green roof on it, which is structurally very difficult. And if you're going to be using natural materials, you really need to be looking at the vernacular styles and technologies that humans have been using for centuries, using natural materials and emulate them. So here in Ireland, I don't think they're ever going to be stipulating that you use green roofs, but they certainly might start stipulating that you have to put solar panels on the roof. And in some ways, that's quite a good idea because they're out of the way, they don't get damaged so easily. And yet, unless we get really heavy hailstorms or we get tornadoes which are ripping the roofs off supermarkets and God knows what around here. So, it's trying to develop something that is completely environmentally friendly, not just for its impact of the materials on the ground, but that is totally suitable to the conditions that we're living in, and that can also be low energy impact and cheap to live in and comfortable to live in and everything. And these days, we have a huge requirement for housing, not only for young people who can't get on, as the capitalists call it, the property ladder, but the thousands and thousands of millions of refugees that are without homes, whether it's people from Africa or people from the Middle East or people from Asia or whatever, or Southern America, Latin America, that are desperately having to leave the homes they come from, not because, oh, I'm coming over here to take advantage of a health service, because where they live has turned into hell. And, if you don't have sympathy for those people, who wants to leave their home and go and live in some other country where people aren't friendly to you and stuff? Yeah, they're going to be crazy. They have to, because otherwise their family gets murdered. So how are we going to cope with that? Millions and millions of refugees that are coming, whether we like it or not, because of the situations we've created with our lifestyles. And so as an answer to that, I can say, well, again, I had an idea many years ago that has started to come to fruition, because I decided it was time I'd start telling people about this crazy idea it had. And that is that we can now spray hempcrete domes really fast, and that a dome might be a bit sci-fi, futuristic, weirdo, hippie, Buckminster Fullerish, but it's incredibly aerodynamic. It's incredibly earthquake proof. It can be built very quickly without an internal structure. A dome is a self-supporting structure, and hempcrete is strong enough as a material to actually be structural in that situation. There are various materials we can use to protect that structure from weather, from rain or whatever. And when you look at what's happening, especially in the US, the tornadoes or the fires that have happened all up the west coast of the US, a hempcrete dome is the only way you're going to preserve your possessions. I'm not suggesting that you could actually stay in a hempcrete building during an inferno around you, because it's going to burn up all the oxygen, so you're going to suffocate. But at least you can lock the door and run away. And if it's hempcrete dome and you've maybe got some kind of steel or fire resistant doors that come down over the windows and doors, at least you can lock the door and run away, and you can come back and there's still something existing there, But when it comes to housing people, that instead of them living on the street in a cardboard box, that you use some bit of land that's owned by the church that shouldn't be allowed to own all that land, or owned by the military that doesn't need all that land, or whatever it is, we can build all these domes for those people to live in and create new villages and towns for them to stay in, where they're comfortable, where they're protected, where they're safe, and we can do it really quickly. But it means a big change. It means people accepting that, well, there's going to be these dome villages erupting all over the place. We could build buildings that aren't dome shaped, probably nearly as quickly, but they're not as structurally sound as a dome, especially when it comes to things like wind or fire. With fire, there's no edges for the fire to get hold of. There's no roofs overhanging, there's no eaves or verges that the fire can sort of get underneath and start burning and then get into the building. There's just this shape that it blows over the top of. And the same with wind. And you're not going to see just a scattering of drywall and insulation panels and stuff that's like confetti all over the landscape after the hurricanes pass through. It's just going to whiz over the top of it, and it's going to be completely safe. There's nothing for the wind to get hold of. So, and these are radical changes when it comes to housing, building, shelter design. But what are we living in? We're living in this world that's changing dramatically. What are we going to do? What, we're just going to ignore that, are we? Pretend that we can just go on business as usual. Business as usual is not an option. It just isn't. So, we have to change, or we accept that it's just going to be one huge mess.
Yeah, we got to adapt.
Yeah.
And can you tell me a little bit more about how the International Hemp Building Association you have founded tries to apply that, and how the
Right. Well, the main resource that we have is from our symposiums, right? So at the end of each symposium, we gather together all the presentations that we got and we put them up in our database, right? So when you become a member, you get access to this database. Now, this database is huge now. We have, I don't know, 130, 140 presentations. Now we have lots of videos of those presentations, so you get all the little nuances of the presenters' information, and we have videos of demonstrations of machinery and techniques and stuff. And then we also have this network of people that if somebody has a question, they can email the association, and if I can't answer it, I know loads of other people that can, or I can put them on to people in their region that can help them with their particular project or business idea or whatever it is. So it's that kind of network. So we're trying to do it through that. Of course, having the name International Hemp Building Association and that sort of body gives us a certain gravitas, so that we hope that we can use that to try and influence governments or policy or whatever. And there have been various examples of that. There's examples of us partnering with the European Industrial Hemp Association when we're challenging these regulations, but also the same thing has happened in Italy, where regulations or government was looking into it and there needed to be a representative of us. So one of our Italian members was able to use our umbrella to attend that meeting as a representative of us, and very loquaciously explain what we were doing. And the same thing when it comes to our symposiums, that hey, these symposiums now have a good reputation, a solid reputation of being like a professional gathering of people, and that there are many academics who are more than willing to present at them, and for their research to be sort of analysed and quantified by the fact that it's been presented at the IHBA's symposium. That gives it credibility. It means their master's degree or whatever gets ticked because, well, it's been presented. And that's, I'm very proud about that, because that's, that is serious. We are that serious group of people. It's not just a sort of hemp event where we're selling bongs and hemp snacks and stuff. It's like, no, there's nothing wrong with that to some extent, but it really is about building and about all the environmental impacts of buildings. Architects are designers of the future and restorers of the past. And that's really important that we have an impact on that, because if we're going to address the challenges that humanity faces, architects are going to be an important part of that. And so we need to be in that architectural world. We need to be taken seriously, because, excuse me, we have some very serious solutions to the questions you're raising. We're not just messing about. We're not just, like just being hemp activists just because, well, hemp's great. Yeah, hemp is great, but there are other materials, as I've said. It's not the only one. But it just so happens that it is an incredibly wide-ranging, impactful material that has impacts for agriculture, that it can improve all sorts of existing agricultural practices as a break crop, as a soil preserver, as a way of increasing biodiversity. All those kind of things, they're all really important. And that's one of the aims of our symposium this year. We're going to the Lower Sioux Reservation, which, like many in Native American reservations, is on very poor land. They haven't been experienced farmers. They don't really know a lot about that sort of thing. They haven't really engaged in farming. And so they're starting to, and they need to improve the quality of their soil to be able to farm successfully. And so I'm trying to bring that expertise from Europe. There's particular groups of people in Europe who've been focusing maybe on that, or achieving that aim of starting to grow hemp 20 odd years ago on land that was maybe not very good, and they've now ended up 20 years later with land that's full of birds and life and fertility, and they're growing hemp as well. Just growing hemp, but the hemp is a part of that change, and that's really important. It's also really important to create processing and factory and jobs where there is circular economy, there's no waste, we're producing all these products that all have a good end use, and that we're creating working conditions that are quite pleasant, and that we're creating, and when it comes to construction, something that we desperately need, which is to re-attract young people. The average age of construction workers across Europe is in the 50s. In the 50s, that means that there's loads of people in the 60s and 70s working in the construction industry, like me. It's mad. So how can we make buildings seem attractive? Oh, we're doing this hemp building project. That pricks up the ears of quite a few young people. And then not only that, but we're building buildings that are really good for the future, that are lovely to live in, that the actual building, that we don't have to be lugging concrete blocks around, you don't have to be working with materials that aren't very pleasant or nice, or are boring, or all plastic, or you can actually feel like you're creating something positive to the future. And then we're creating buildings that are lovely to live in, that are really healthy and comfortable, and can be, with the right designs, built affordably, cheaply, so it doesn't cost you the earth. You don't have to be a millionaire to move into it, and that you can have social housing that's nice and ecological to live in. That's just has many benefits as somebody that has more income. And so those sort of implications are really important. The fact that it's hemp, sorry, but it's hemp. I can't do anything about that. It just so happens that this material has helped imagine that future and plays an important part in it. And if you can come up with another material that does the same kind of thing, great. But there have been alternatives proposed. Some of them haven't worked so well, or it doesn't really work as an industrial input. Others are, but maybe not. They sort of suit some aspects of it, like, for instance, flax particles. Flax is another bast fiber crop, but it's not as environmentally friendly to grow, and the particles are much smaller, so they're suitable for plastering. But hempcrete doesn't really work in the same way, and so we have to sort of say, okay, we can use it for that. It just so happens, by design and by fortune, that the size of hemp particles that we've selected, or that we've produced by the processing of hemp, work very well in the applications that we've devised for it. So a particular range of particles works really well when you're making blocks or casting walls or whatever. A wider range of particles can be used to spray. We've found that you can use even bigger particles that might be ideal to use in casting, work perfectly well when you're spraying them in certain situations of certain types of dimensions. And then there's other large particles, well, they're actually better off if you just put them in a block rather than trying to spray them, because they might bounce off the wall because they're too big or whatever. There's all sorts of little variations that, with expertise and with use, you pick up. But hemp just has this sort of ideal structure. And I know plenty of academics who have done all sorts of tests, and they marvel. They just can't believe how the more they look into this stuff, the more answers it comes up with. It's just, this stuff's ridiculous. It's just so good. The way it works is so complex naturally. And I've had recent conversations, slight disagreements, you could say, with people on LinkedIn who want to promote 3D printing of hempcrete. And it's like, well, the first thing is, the photograph you've got there, what you're printing isn't hempcrete, it's hemp plaster. So it doesn't have all the benefits that hempcrete has, because hemp plaster is not as insulating as hempcrete is. It doesn't have quite the sort of like porosity and movement of moisture that hempcrete has. It's a little bit slower. It's all right as a plaster coat, but if you're trying to build a whole wall of it, it would be too dense. It would cause problems with moisture movement in some cases. And you're creating all these cavities in the wall. And the whole thing about a solid monolithic hempcrete wall is that it's a uniform material all the way through. There's no cavities for rats to get into and think, oh, I've got a lovely apartment here. Mm-hmm. That's stupid. And also, we've got all these people that need employment. What's the point of developing all this high-tech stuff where you're slowly printing a wall? We have spray technology now that's 10 times faster than that. Why are you even thinking about 3D printing?
People think about it because everybody wants to have some kind of technological, patentable thing that gives them some sort of competitive advantage, because that's the world of business that we've created. Right. Everyone wants to be special. Everyone wants to have their contribution. And like you said, spraying can be even better, even faster, and the results can be even more awesome. So you brought up plaster. So I want to switch gears, because earlier you had mentioned using different minerals, and when I went off camera a little bit, I was gifted these 2 years ago from an engineer. I'm in Poland, in case anybody didn't know. So this is like, I have no idea how it's made, but apparently it's up to 90% hemp particles and basalt.
Right. Okay. Yep.
And it feels and like it's cold, like a terracotta pot. And this is specifically for flowers. It actually absorbs water. I haven't done tests to see how much water it absorbs, but I've filled it to the top, and a few hours later, it was, down a few centimeters. That's how much water it had absorbed before it hit, let's say, critical absorption. But so, what do you think about alternative? I've seen him like also making tiles and bricks and other things, non-structural things, and other shapes and weird oddities from basalt and hemp.
Yeah, yeah.
Huh?
Well, I have also seen some basalt and hemp materials in the EIHA conferences maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, and I could possibly have been the same guy, and he was producing some kind of panels, I think. Now, I did look into it a bit, and a friend of mine promised me that he would give me some basalt materials to do things with, but he never did, and I haven't actually followed that up. It's one of the things you sort of forget about because there are so many other things bombarding my world. But I'm not so sure about the ecological credentials of basalt as an extractive material. I'm not sure how readily available that is around the world. It might be something that's everywhere. I mean, the thing about lime or calcium carbonate is that it's 4% of the Earth's crust. So it's pretty much everywhere.
Seems like a lot.
So, but at the same time, there are lots of environmental implications of using lime, which are not so good. It can be a caustic substance if you're not protected when you're using it. It actually emits more carbon in its manufacture or more CO2 than cement does, but then it reabsorbs it during its lifetime, whereas cement doesn't. So cement isn't suitable just as a material to build your nest with. When we're talking about building environments or structures that human beings are occupying, we should be thinking them more about like a bird thinks about a nest or a mouse thinks about a burrow than about a safe deposit box where you put all your stuff, right? And that's what's unfortunately has been the focus, where people have made these nice hard steel concrete boxes to put all this stuff, right? And that's what it's about, rather than, oh, I feel really cozy and comfortable in this space. Never mind about how much stuff's in it, just, oh, I feel nice and comfortable here. And that's, again, it's a change of focus. So the materials that we use as alternatives and that have been used successfully, as Damien with his Easy mix, which is a patented mix. It has a particular local geological material that he's familiar with using because it's nearby to where he lives, which they call natural cement. It's mined by a company called VCAT, who own this mountain near Grenoble, which is a particularly unique geological formation of this material that when you mine it and treat it like lime or cement, it works into this material that is like incredibly fast cement, but that is still vapor porous. Not quite as vapor porous as lime, but it is vapor porous. So he mixes that with some hydrated lime, and then he mixes it with other things, sort of glues that help it perform through his application technique, which again is unique. And it uses a sort of vacuum and propulsion created by compressed air rather than just propulsion, which is what most of the compressed air type spraying systems use. Now, there are implications to that are energy intensive and everything as well, but the speed of it and the performance of the material and the fact that it's a low carbon material itself means that it's a question of balancing out your carbon emissions. It's very difficult to do anything without any carbon emissions at all. But then you also get materials like Monica Brummer developed in Spain, Canabricks, that are a mixture of clay and lime and hemp, and with a good knowledge of clay, which again is all over the planet, we can be building buildings like that, which again is reaching back into the past and using earth buildings, but making them a little bit more modern and better performing and more usable in a modern situation. Because even though you can look at many like ancient cultures, if you like, or cultures that are in what we might term the developing world, but you can't go there and say, you don't want to live in a concrete building, you should live in a mud hut because it's more ecological. That's like they're going to look at it and say, what on earth are you talking about? We're not going back to living in mud huts. But if you show them a really nice modern house that just happens to be made out of mud, and don't need necessarily to tell them it's made out of mud, but hey, it's made out of mud and maybe some hemp and some other thing in it, like you can make it look really nice and modern and it's comfortable to live in, and you can build it yourself maybe. Hey, that's an alternative. That's an option. So that's a thing that we have to sort of learn to do, to communicate to people who are not in our world, but that are coming into our world, if you like, of the use of the planet's resources, and how can we start them off on the right foot? So unlike the Chinese and other nations, they're not trying to emulate us exactly and make all the mistakes we've made. And it's very difficult. I mean, I was working in Haiti many years ago before it completely collapsed, and it was bad enough when I was there, but it was just after the earthquake, and it was, the whole nation was traumatized by that. But one of the first questions I was asked about hempcrete is it bulletproof? Which to me was horrifying and so sad that was the first thing they wanted to know about the building, was whether the stray bullets that the gangsters were firing around all over the place might come through their house. So the kind of issues outside of the safe west of Europe and America are very different as to what we might think. So again, having an international approach that I've been able to develop means that I'm aware of all these other issues, and that can be overwhelming at times. But the uptake of these materials has to be tailored in such a way as to be attractive to people. And part of that is being able to provide something that works. That works, where you can say, look, you can live in this building. You're not going to have a huge bank loan that you pay off, your death gate, as a mortgage is called, isn't what it means. You're not going to have this burden on your life that makes your life like slavery. You can live in this building, and that it's comfortable, that you're not going to have to be spending huge amounts on keeping it comfortable, that it's not going to be unhealthy with mold growing up and down the walls and stuff, and that we as a society and as a species, we can say, hey, we're doing the right thing. It's a huge ask. We are just here in the rooms putting our hand up saying we have a solution, please listen. And it's a matter of devising ways of trying to get attention. So this year particularly, it seems to be coming together that much more than other years. I have young people, including people like my daughter and her partner, and other people that have been introduced to us over the last few years, of course you guys, who are offering, trying to come in and trying to help us promote this in all the modern ways that we need, and podcasts and posts and reels and all these sort of things are all what we need to do, it seems, to get the thing across. But my main thing is, how do we get to or are these the right vehicles to get to the people that are making policy? Because in a lot of ways we can persuade everybody in the world that they want a hemp house, but unless there is a whole lot of sort of structures and stuff that push that sort of thing, so that they almost have to have a hemp house, but that it's a good solution, is we do need governments we need bottom up and we need top down.
Yeah.
We've got to get rid of all these crazy options, and we need to be really promoting from a regulatory, and not just regulatory, but from a sort of a where are we going type thing, of people who are in control, the common people, you could say, well, the government or those people should be doing that, and they should. so then they can say, oh well, the government approves it, it's okay. Then also the people who say, oh, the bloody government telling us to do that. I'm not going to have the government telling me what to do. But those same people will say, well, why doesn't the government do that? Why doesn't the government provide me housing? Why doesn't the government do the roads? Why does the government provide me with a health service? Well, they can, but the only way they're going to successfully do that is to do it sustainably.
Nice. Is there I think we definitely need to do a few more of these. I think we could do a whole series based on your experience and hempcrete and everything. So is there anything that any message you want to leave the audience with? Maybe it's any politicians who are listening, or any policymakers who could be listening, anything that you'd like to say that you haven't said already?
Well, I think when it comes to politics, there are all sorts of existing old, in many ways out of date ideologies, socialism, capitalism, whatever you like to call it. And the Green Party generally are the people that sort of seem to be trying to promote ideas that are beneficial for humanity and that have some elements of sustainability and stuff. Now, they've been scapegoated. they're scapegoated across the world. It's like, the green, what are the Greens? It's all their fault we're having to have these regulations that are stopping us doing all this crazy shit. And, so my message to the Green Party and their politicians is that look around you. Who's getting attention? It's not the people that are nice and quiet and polite and like, we've got to, we've got to keep our calm and everything. Yes, we do in a lot of cases, but we've got to get people's attention first. And so we've got to start getting a bit outrageous. We've got to be radical Greens. We've got to say the things that people don't necessarily want to hear, but they will listen to, because, boy, did you hear what he said? And we've got to have the answers to these lunatics who come out with this, just spout loud lies one after the other and think they can get away with it because nobody challenges them. But we've got to be really clever with our debates. We've got to be really clever with our answers to the lunatics who are coming out with this rubbish. We've got to know our stuff, and we've got to be radical, because we haven't got the time to be messing about and being polite. Excuse me, but this is an emergency. Mm-hmm. And in the middle of the word emergency is urgency. Right? I don't know. What I think I can do to help you guys. Certainly, I'm willing to do many more podcasts, more podcasts. But I have an older friend who's not in the best of health, but he lives in New Zealand, and he was always an alternative underground communicator. He used to run an old hippie newspaper back in England in the late 60s, early 70s, and he produces these amazing graphic missives. Right? He's a graphic, designer, sort of publisher type graphic person, and he's an amazing thinker, and he sort of gathers and reaches into all these philosophies and writings and theories and stuff from humanity, and he gets out stuff that you've never heard of yet, and yet maybe 2 years later or a year later, whatever, they are emerging out into the common sort of discourse. But it's people like him that are initiating that, without him maybe even being aware of it, or anybody else being aware of it. But maybe it's just the zeitgeist, as I say. Maybe it's just that time where those things come. And I've that has happened to me in my life, where I've been thinking ideas and stuff, and then 2 years later it becomes almost common parlance. It wasn't as if I was out there talking about it or publishing it, whatever, but it seems that just eventually those ideas sort of float to the top. So maybe we need to accelerate that. Maybe there's other ways, and maybe I can include you in the sometimes he makes these files. Sometimes he just sends me the printed versions of them, but I can get him to send me the graphic, the digital files, and I can send them to guys like you, who are obviously smart enough to grok, as Heinlein used to say in his Stranger in a Strange Land book, deeply understand the implications of this stuff, the importance of this stuff, and put it out there. Because that's all I can say, is that we really need to pull our fingers out. We really need to say, because this, we haven't got a lot of time, and by being sort of sitting back and letting things happen, you get these despots getting elected because nobody else is being as outrageous as they are. Nobody else is saying things that do have relevance to people, but with a caring and intelligence and compassion that's needed for it to be something we would want to take up, rather than some greedy, egotistical, the words fail me.
Sure. Yeah, it's definitely not the time to be passive. Well, thank you, sir, for, let's say, episode 1 with you. It's been eye-opening, to say the least.
Yeah, we need to make bold statements backed by nature. And if you want, you can promote your books you have made, Steve, and also please give out the date of the Hemp Building Symposium.
Right, yeah, so it's the 3rd to the 5th of October this year in 2025 in Minnesota, in America. You fly into Minneapolis if you're coming from outside America or from distant parts of the US or the American continent. And it's probably near Highway 61, which, seeing as Bob Dylan is in the highlights in the news at the moment, it's a great song if you ever listen to it. I love that song.
Nice. And where can people find your books?
on my website, hempbuilding.com, or which will then lead you to my wife and I's publishing company, seedpress.ie, and my books are available there.
Awesome.
Wonderful. Let's close it out there. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. And see you in the next one. Thank you very much, Steve.
Thanks very much. Bye now.